All right, hello and welcome. So today we're going to start off with this activity. So you may have done this before. This is kind of something that a lot of programs do now. But they'll start off and you'll be in a room and they'll just say, look around the room for green things. So everybody obviously does what they say. They start looking around and they start noticing different things that are green. So, for example, the plant in the corner, maybe the leaves outside, maybe the plant's up here, maybe the little vase that's on top of this, maybe this plant over here, and the vase in the coffee table underneath the roses is also green. So you do this for a bit, and then at a certain point, they'll say, okay, now tell me, what is blue? And then the first thing you'll do is obviously try to look for it, and then they'll say, no, you can't look. Just tell me what's blue. And you obviously can't reproduce any of that because you were looking for green things. The point they're trying to make here is obviously that perception is guided by intent, right? So everything that you're looking for in the world, you're obviously going to find. Everything you're not looking for in the world, you're going to ignore. I'm not going to use it that way, though. I'm going to add another element to it. So what if I said this? I said, look around the room for saccharine things. So the first thing you might be wondering is, well, what's saccharine? So it is a color, I'll tell you that much, but most of you aren't going to know what color it is. So the point I'm trying to make is that what I'm going to be explaining aren't going to be things that you know what to look for. So just as saccharine is something that is not something you can really look for at this point, what I'm explaining is going to be sort of similar to that, as in we won't really understand it to look for it. So we just kind of have to take in information in a way that is just open. If you're going to be successful kind of learning this way, you kind of really need an open mind. And we'll talk about that a lot more in the next slide here. But for now, I'll just leave it at that. Robert Pirsig, the guy that we've been talking about quite a bit with the motorcycle, this is the way he describes philosophy. He's like, if you know what kind of fish you're fishing for, you're not fishing, you've already caught it. So when I asked you to look for green things, you already know what green things are. So you're not going to learn anything looking for green things. You're just going to categorize things. You're going to put them in little like mental boxes. Okay, these are all green, this one, this one, this one. And there's going to be a sort of a gray area in between two colors, maybe in one, and you won't know whether to put it in one side or the other side. But when you're trying to, if there's something we were talking about before, so I'll talk about here in a sec, but when we were talking about that circle element, which is the biggest, like not the small circle, but the big circle, that is supposed to be that thing that we were talking about before, that is outside the cave, if we take Plato's suggestion. So you're not going to be able to understand it by thinking that you can compare something to it. And like I say, well, this whole reason for this talk today is to help explain how we're supposed to perceive these things. And you do whatever you want, of course. I'm just kind of saying what would be the most beneficial. Because every once in a while we're going to have something like this. Obviously this is a platypus. And anybody that knows much about platypuses knows that they don't fit into categories very well. So just like when you're going between two things that are sort of green or sort of not green, the platypus is kind of that, if that in an animal form. We're going to have certain things like that. So if we look at on the taxonomical sort of taxonomical trees, he's in his own little section with I think the echidna, and they're completely separate. So the point is if we try to fit everything into like small little boxes, that some things aren't going to fit. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment here. So let's start with this guy. So we talked about the deduction before being like, okay, this is always true, though, so this is always true. Therefore, C is always true too. You have to have these things that are concrete, not changing, that you can kind of base your understanding of the world on. If we look at the first of our, uh, after the pre-Socratics, and I think the pre-Socratics were quite brilliant, but we don't know them at all because the switch to deduction happened kind of after this guy. So Socrates is one of his famous quotes is the only true wisdom is knowing that you know nothing. This is obviously not conducive to believe that you can deduce from different things being true all the time, right? That just not is not going to work in this mentality. Uh, this is more of a advocation for induction. So not to believe that you know anything beforehand, but being willing to learn about things as you go. That doesn't mean that you don't have some premises that you kind of are most of the time true, and that you can't sort of base your understanding on that thing, and most of the time it's true. So I'm not saying that it's rigidly like that, but we'll take another really famous philosopher to really help solidify this idea that we can't take much for granted in this world. And sorry, before I mention that, what Socrates did, because he said you couldn't trust anything in the world to have true wisdom about, or have true wisdom, is what they would do is, like I said before, they'd do geometry, and they would do math, because math and geometry, 2 plus 2 is always 4, right? So that was what they kind of said, this is the only way to really know anything true that's always going to be true, is obviously these things are immutable. But somebody went one step further. So Rene Descartes, obviously somebody that was very influential. So I don't know if many people know this guy's name, but they may know this, which is cogito ergo sum, which means I think, therefore I am, or I perceive, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. So this is even one step further than Socrates or Plato. So he made an argument that you couldn't even trust this, is that there could be somebody that was a trickster and is trying to convince you that 2 plus 2 equals something other than 2 plus 2. Or the example that he gave was a little more convoluted than that. But the point he's making is that he can't even rest his own ideas on math and geometry. All he can say for sure is, because I'm thinking, therefore I must be something alive. Is basically what he's saying. So I think, therefore I am. It's just basically stripping everything you believe about the world down to as limited amount as possible. And this shows you the importance of induction and how we should do this for everything. Or I should say, why I believe that we should do this for everything is because if you deduce too much in the world, you believe that you know too much, and you close your mind to learning anything new. Whereas in induction, everything is going to present itself as it comes. So I gave the example last time of Socrates saying that he didn't know anything true that was true. He was always just trying to figure out the truth when he talked to somebody else, and he called himself the midwife of knowing, or of truth. So midwife being somebody that helps deliver a baby. So that's all his responsibility was, is to invoke the thinking of the other person, to ask questions in order to find the truth together. And he didn't assume that he knew the truth. And I think this is something we're missing today because we think we know so much. So my humble opinion. So let's ask ourselves this question. What came first, mind or matter? If we listen to, let's do matters first. So if we take the position of matter, there was one unified entity at one time. And because there's no space, there's no time, this is before there is the concept of time. So at some point, balance was lost and everything split. And we don't really know why all this happened. But there was this incident that created everything which followed, which is the entire universe according to matter. So we could say that, okay, we'll figure it out in the future. Maybe we will. But right now, matter doesn't have an answer for this first step. Mind does have an answer for this first step. So for mind, everything started off as consciousness, and it starts off the same way too. Let's try to do this like this. Can we take it off? Nope. Okay, let's just do this like this then. Not saying it's more important by making it bigger, but let's say that this is consciousness. So if we take the perspective of consciousness being first, this being the first step, why did it split up? Well, we've already kind of outlined how that's possible. Remember our one picture has, so we have the big circle around the outside and the big triangle. So this is the unchanging state. We'll just call it the unchanging state. And just bear with me, I know these things are a little bit out there, these ideas. But that is the unchanging state. And then we have the other ones that were movement, which is the square element and the circle element. And that's kind of like our perceptive world, is these two. So what's missing in this picture is the other two we drew. So we drew one triangle that's going down and one triangle that's going up. So those are actually inside of here, if we did this correctly. This all of a sudden makes sense. So we have two opposing aims. We have that which is going to be one, or this is going to be the one that all that wants to be one, and all that wants to be many. This is when things changed, and there was a period before where everything was unified in this triangle state, and then it became many. That would be the answer that I think, if you logically follow the mind stuff, that would be where you go. This is interesting though, because I'm going to talk about this as far as we did yesterday. If we think about this as though this is this part, and this is the world of the squares and the circles, of this sort of a split perception. And remember what I said last time, that there was one on the one side that split, there was the two over here that were sort of mirrored images of each other, but this one was like physically split. That's what this cave world is, and this is what Plato was referring to. This is why the world can never have anything perfect in it. It's because they're consciousness ideas that come from beliefs from here that are trying to represent itself with two opposing forces. So, and then this is not necessarily like these are always going to be opposing each other, but having something going for one and having something going for many is creating tension. Just like we were talking about with the bow, opposites is what creates motion. So tension of opposites. One thing pulling back creates tension here, releases an arrow this way. So this is the point I'm trying to make. I'm just trying to make what we were talking about last time, because it's going to take a few times to hear it in order for us to understand. This is the sort of saccharine principle, if you will. So I'll ask you right now, define this white screen. How can you define this? So what you might say first is, it's white. Well, that's a category. So this is I've heard other people call this like Aristotelian boxes. So Aristotle was the first one to say, okay, we need all these categories to split things in. And that's obviously what we do today, is we split people in categories, and we split different types of issues and illnesses into categories. And that seems to be what most of the scientific process does. So you might say that. I'm going to get rid of this if I can. Maybe I can't. Okay. Or what you might say is, okay, well, it's the opposite of black. And if you say it's the opposite of black, then you're just defining it based on an opposite. But keep in mind, what we're talking about right now, doesn't have an opposite. It is one and it is going in one direction. So the other that seems like it's change, we're defining what we see based on change and based on differences. So you may, I don't know how you could only compare it to something else, right? You could say something else that was white if you're going to explain it. But you can see the same problem always coming up. You're always defining it based on what it isn't, or based on something similar. And that's assuming that there's something that isn't unified. So this is what people typically say when somebody asks them to define this sort of thing. This is a quote by Dan Walsh. So, I know that I know that I know that I know it. The trouble is that I know that I know it. And when I try to tell you what it is that I know, I don't know what to say. So this is the problem he's having. I'm making huge assumptions here, by the way. But this is what I'm saying is what the problem he's having. This is not a world of opposites. So how do you explain something that only is vaguely referenced on the other plane, or like the sort of existence planes that we can perceive if we take Plato's perspective that there is the world that is perfect, and like the Parmenides talked about, the world that is unchanging, boundless, and without contradiction. Then how do you explain that? There's no way to do it. You can only kind of like allude to it based on what is the best of this world. What is the good, as they say? What is the good? Yeah, we already talked about that. Okay, so I know this was a weird thing to go through yesterday, but I think it's essential in the future. So first of all, I didn't really explicitly outline, obviously this makes a triangle. But also, this makes a triangle. And like I said, this is actually 1. All these 3 is actually 1 in this situation. The problem was here, right? Was what became here. And the 4 elements, if there's one that was removed, this is kind of impossible. So I didn't really mention that this folded in together too, so this made the shape like, if we give this on this side dimension, oh gosh, I'm such a terrible drawer. But anyway, there'd be 4, and then the bottom's square. So if we extend the square bottom, we can kind of see it in the perspective. If we look like this, and there'd be 4 different directions. So I didn't mention that, but I mentioned also that Empedocles showed the 3 that were together, and this is, if you talk about this with somebody that really is into geometry, they'll tell you that triangles are the one that makes the biggest structures, and then squares are quite a bit smaller. You can only go to a certain degree with squares to be extended. So I know in some ways I probably explained things, in some ways I made them more confusing, or made it more frustrating because you can't really grasp it with your mind quite yet. And that's, gosh, I'm not saying that this is anything complicated. This is the simplest thing ever, but we just, to let go of what we think we know is the hardest part. So just be open to it. Try to be like Rene Descartes, or like Plato and Socrates, that we can believe that we don't know anything, even though we're supposed to know a lot at this time of our lives, and we're not supposed to know a lot in this age we live in. So that's hard to do. So if you can do that, that's pretty impressive. But anyway, I'll leave it there for today. I just wanted to do this one to kind of clear up what we were talking about the other day. Hopefully it does it. But we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.